The Carolina Hurricanes had numerous players from the Chicago Wolves on their roster at various points this season and postseason, and we sit down with Sarah Avampato from SB Nation's Cane Country to talk about how all of those guys performed this season in this episode of Locked On Hurricanes.
You're Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, Caniacs. I'm your host, Jared Ellis, and you're listening to Locked On Hurricanes on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Hurricanes your first listen of the day. And today's episode is brought to you by the lovely folks over at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. And I am once again joined by Sarah Avampato of SB Nation's Canes Country, a Locked On OG. And you guys all know her coverage of the Chicago Wolves over there on Canes Country. And like I said, Carolina Hurricanes had a lot of guys from the Wolves on their roster at various points of the season. We'll obviously hit the big names, of course. And Jack Drury, he was a guy that came up towards the end of the season, if I remember correctly. It's kind of when Svetch went down, he got the call up and once again found himself on the Canes roster. How were you feeling about his performance on the Hurricanes roster this season?
So I feel like it was really sort of like the tale of two Jack Drurys, right? Because he was on the Wolves roster for a little bit, got called up, returned, kind of went back and forth a little bit. And towards the end of the season, it was much more like what I expected to see from Jack Drury. His like February and March were really good in terms of consistently providing offense, being involved in plays. The beginning of the season, not so much. I feel like he went a big chunk of games without even getting on the scoreboard, or like one goal in his first like 6-7 games or something, which is not who he is as a player. So I feel like this year was maybe a little more of a struggle for him than expected. I know that at the end of last year, everyone just sort of anointed him onto the Hurricanes roster, and then he had a hard time sticking, which I'm sure is hard, psychologically for any player to have everyone telling you like, oh, you're for sure going to be on the NHL next year, and then to get sent back down. But, I thought he conducted himself well. And when he wasn't scoring, he was still contributing in the lineup. And I feel like once he finally got back up with the Hurricanes at the end of the season, really kind of stuck in that lineup.
Yeah, do you feel that could have been sort of just growing pains of him having more and more time, and now other teams, AHL and NHL, both having more tape to go off with him, really knowing how to plan for him? Do you think it could have been growing pains? And
yeah, I mean, I would definitely put that up to a lot of it, and just sort of I have to elevate my game. And in the AHL he could get away with taking a shift off, taking a period off, and he'd be fine. And he can't do that in the NHL. I think a lot about one time when I talked with Ryan Warsofsky last season about Jack Drury, and I was kind of like, what's the ceiling for this kid? Where do you see him at? And he basically was like, I don't want to put a ceiling on him, because he basically is someone who just explodes through whatever expectation people have of him. And so, I do kind of wonder though, like the weight of expectations, was that hard for him to deal with, and yeah, I mean, I think that the adjustment to the NHL, you can be as gifted as you want in the AHL. We see it all the time of players who are phenomenal in the AHL and then just can't quite get it together at the next level. Like, I don't think that's going to be Jack Drury. I think that he is, I have seen him. He's a smart enough hockey player to figure it out. But it's not abnormal to see a guy struggle his first real exposure to the NHL, because it is a different game than any other league.
Yeah, 110%. I do think he will be at some point, a mainstay of the Hurricanes
Mhm.
roster and not a guy that goes back and forth.
Mhm.
It's just, he's young. He's what,
Yeah,
21, if
something like
that?
that. Yeah.
Like he's a kid.
Yeah.
So you expect this kind of stuff from him. And guys that didn't go back and forth
Mhm.
between the rosters were Steph Nazen and Jalen Chatfield.
Yeah.
They, from opening night all the way through, those guys, aside from getting hurt,
Mhm.
they played every game,
Yeah.
and every regular season game and every playoff game. And we said, throughout the season that, there were guys that those were guys right there that
Mhm.
had things, gone sideways for them for an extended period of time, not just
Mhm.
one game. Easy, send them back to
Yeah.
Chicago. And because two-way deals, super easy to
Mhm.
do that.
Mhm.
And, I don't think, anyone really would have batted an eye
Yeah.
at that because of that. But those were guys that, like Seth Jarvis last year,
Mhm.
kind of forcing their way onto the roster. Like, no, I'm
Mhm.
gonna be here and
Yeah.
I'm gonna play my butt off.
Yeah.
And I think they really exceeded everyone's expectations of
Mhm.
them. Jalen Chatfield, especially
Yeah.
especially Steph Nazen, he was a force on the Hurricanes power play as well. And I do expect to see those guys back next year as well. And watching those guys, not play in the AHL. How was
Mhm.
that for you this year?
Yeah, I mean, from a Wolves perspective, like that was a
Mhm.
huge blow. I think that people expected maybe, they'd go back and forth or be the one who gets called up, whenever someone gets hurt. Chatfield might come up as like seventh, eighth defenseman or something on a road trip. I don't know that anyone was really anticipating either of them to stick, particularly Nason, who has been around in professional hockey for quite some time and really just never stuck with an NHL team. And so you kind of expected, no shade on either of them who are both great hockey players, but you sort of expected like once players get stuck in that kind of like AHL bubble, sometimes it's hard to like, I feel like coaches and front offices get an idea in their head of who a player is and they're like, oh, he's the AHL guy.
Mhm.
So also credit to the Hurricanes organization and Rod Brind'amour for being like, nope, that guy, I want him.
Mhm.
So it sucked for the Wolves, who Chatfield especially was a huge missing piece on that blue line. Except for Max Lajoie in Chicago, like the blue line was largely, pretty inexperienced guys or guys who had just come back over from Europe or something.
Mhm.
And they were really missing someone like Chatfield back there. And same with Nason. Like they had a good amount of veteran voices, but he is someone who just I feel like any room he is in, he elevates, makes the
Mhm.
guys around him better. So it was a big missing piece for the Wolves, and I think had they both been there, even for parts of the season, the Wolves I think would have been in a different spot than they were at the end of the season. But as someone who covered both of them all of last year, and got to know them through interviewing them and talking to them after games, like I'm like I raised these two adult men with my own hands. Like
Hmm.
like it felt really good to see both of them stick in the NHL. Nason, like I said, has gone back and forth, has really had a hard time finding a team to give him the time and the ice time that he got in Carolina. Chatfield kind of took the long route. I know struggled I think with Utica, I believe, for a couple of seasons. Didn't really do anything there. Just a real late bloomer in terms
Mhm.
of his game, but is someone who I feel like has gotten better with every challenge he's been given, and two very solid additions to that Hurricanes team.
Yeah, I agree. They're guys that took us all by surprise. If
Mhm.
remember last year, whenever the Hurricanes had a bunch of guys out with COVID, I want to say it was the game you were here for. It was
Mhm.
when like half of the Hurricanes roster was Wolves players,
Yep.
and Jalen Chatfield, in that stint that he had there, he played good enough to
Yeah.
get himself a contract extension then. So you figure, the way he did this year, things are
Mhm.
going to be looking up for him. And, you know, don't necessarily want to do like we did with Jack Drury last year
Mhm.
of just going ahead and penciling them in for next year.
Mhm.
I think Chatfield would be the easier one to do that with Dahan, Gossespierre, and Coughlin all being UFAs.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, maybe he would be one that'd be don't want to make him a lock, but I feel
Yeah.
like he would have the better shot.
Yeah.
But yeah, you talk about both of those guys being in the AHL a lot. They got to a system that
Mhm.
worked for them, and they had an organization and coaching staff that believed in them and was giving them that ice time and developing them well.
Mhm.
And I think that probably boosted their confidence a
Yeah.
bit,
Yeah.
because I'm sure it kind of sucks, having a oh, ring, ring. Oh, gotta
Right.
go to Raleigh. Ring,
Yeah.
ring. Okay, I'm going back to Chicago or,
Mhm.
wherever it might be.
Mhm.
That can't be good for them mentally of, having to go back and forth between the leagues. So for them
Yeah.
to be able to be here and stick and not miss any games aside
Mhm.
from being hurt, no stints in the AHL, I
Yeah.
think that was really, really good for them. And I do think we will continue to see those guys
Yeah.
in the Hurricanes organization, likely on the Hurricanes roster come October,
Mhm.
September, if you want to count the preseason as well. But, there's still a few more guys we want to talk about, as well as Sarah's views on the season. And we will do that right after this quick break, folks. Now, folks, buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets to all of the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. So if you don't know you're going to be off work that day and it turns out you're off, Game Time has you covered. So get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and much, much more. The Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price if you find tickets in the same section and row for less. Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Don't get surprised by a pole in your way because that's never fun. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you're all set. Tickets are also sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email because that is never fun. I've had to deal with that before. Not fun. So download the Game Time app and create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Now, a couple other guys that we saw throughout the year. First and foremost, we honestly surprised we didn't talk about him to start with. Pyotr Kochetkov.
Mhm.
He is the only goaltender under contract for the Hurricanes in next season. So obviously he is not going anywhere anytime soon. But I was sort of surprised we didn't see more of him in the playoffs.
Mhm.
But again, I'm also not surprised because when Freddie was hot, he was
Yeah.
hot. When
Yeah.
Antti Raanta was hot, he was hot. And you don't want to go away from that hot set of hands. But Pyotr Kochetkov, during his time here during the regular season, he was outstanding
Mhm.
and really having some, at the time, momentum of potentially being a Calder finalist.
Mhm.
Obviously, he did not meet that criteria, so he would still be eligible next year. So, fingers crossed on that one. But how was it? How was it seeing Piotr in the NHL and the AHL this year? Did you see any growth from him, or what all did you see from him this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the big things about him is like, okay, so like in Chicago, he very quickly became a fan favorite because he has that personality, right? Like
Mhm,
he's a big personality. He's not afraid to like get into it with people. And I think we're seeing him, particularly in the NHL, like learn to pick his battles better.
yeah.
Sure, it's fun, particularly in the AHL level where you're like, if they win, they win. If they don't, like it's not that deep, in the
Mhm,
AHL, but like you never want your goaltender costing you a goal or costing you a game. And so I feel like just maturity wise, in the NHL, I didn't really see any of that where I was like, oh, you need to dial it back down. Um,
mhm,
he is definitely a player who I'm like he should not be in Chicago next year. There is no Also, I mean, being the only goaltender under contract, you might need him. But I don't know that he has anything else to learn at the AHL level. I'd much rather see him, backing up or being like a 1A, 1B in Carolina. But in Chicago, I mean, he very nearly dragged the Wolves to the playoffs. There is a huge difference in the Wolves without Kochetkov and with him. Those times where he was sent back down to Chicago are the times where the Wolves would rack up wins. They essentially missed out on the playoffs by 1 point. It is one of the biggest what ifs for the Chicago Wolves this season, more than having Nason, more than having Chatfield in the lineup. It is, what would the Wolves have been had they actually, like, no disrespect to Zach Sawchenko, but like, what if they had an actual, like, essentially NHL caliber goalie as, their starter? Because Sawchenko's fine as a, like, backup, but that's all you're getting from him. He's not supposed to be your starter, and there he was. Had Kochetkov been in Chicago, not even all season, but like more than he was, I think that they could have snuck into the playoffs. Like, they were on a roll at the end of the year, and you could feel it. You could feel the confidence growing with each win, knowing that they had a goaltender there who was going to stop pucks no matter what. And it was a shame, really, to see them not get rewarded for how hard they worked to stay competitive at the end of the season when everyone had written them off. Like, they almost did it. And it is really entirely because of Kochetkov getting back in there and getting in the lineup and giving them chances to win every night.
Yeah, and he is definitely, I think, the future of the Hurricanes in between the pipes. Obviously, again, he's the only one under contract next year, so kind of by default he would be. But he's very, very young. He's, I know, younger than me. He's what, 22, 23 years old. I know he's early 20s, and so it kind of makes you think, is this, who the front office is like seeing as like, all right, 3 years from now, this is our guy. And it does kind of make you feel like, okay, all right, this is them setting themselves up for that, because again, we said it so many times on this show over the years of really ever since Cam Ward left, the Hurricanes have not had consistent a consistent goalie. Like, it's one thing to have a backup rotating in and out, because that was the case with Cam Ward. He was getting overworked, overplayed, playing hurt, all that. We all know that. We all know how it went. And he never had that real quality backup to take a load off of him, because had he had that, his prime years could have lasted even longer. That's just a what if scenario there. But it does feel like, the Hurricanes are setting themselves up, and they're not going to have this revolving door of every few years. You got a new one. It's not like, Peter Mrazek, Curtis McElhinney, Peter Mrazek, James Reimer, and then throwing Ned in there as well for his little stint. Probably previous regimes thought he would be the guy. Wasn't the case. They decided to move on. Even though that still hurts, inside. Ultimately, I do feel it was the right move looking back. And then, Freddie Anderson, Antti Ranta, one, if not both of those guys are going to be gone next year. They're both UFAs. I do think, however, Freddie Anderson has earned himself a contract extension with how well he played. Antti Ranta did as well. So, I mean, it's not like one was like super bad or anything like that. But, you're going to have turnover in net this year. So to have Kochetkov on this roster, on the books, and playing with a team he knows, it's not like a guy, he has 3 years left on a deal, but he's getting traded. No, that's not the case. Like, he knows the guys he's going to be playing with. He has rapport built up with these guys and the coaching staff and all that. And I think that is going to be really something that helps him out in the long run.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, thinking about next season, you have Freddie Anderson, Antti Ranta, both unrestricted free agents. I feel like in the ideal world, one of them comes back and then
Mhm.
Kochetkov is the backup.
Yeah.
Which one of those it is, I don't know. Does it matter? Like they both were good. They both were hurt.
Mhm.
That is the calling card of both of those goaltenders is they're good and they're also always falling apart. But yeah, I think that having a game plan for the future, looking at Kochetkov and knowing like unless something goes really sideways, that like this is a guy who you can potentially like build out from over
Mhm.
the next 3, 5, 7 whatever years. I think is really good for the team. Yeah, it stinks for well, whoever the AHL affiliate is going to be next year because who knows what's happening um,
Mhm.
with Chicago. But I think that he does provide that sense of stability um, for the organization to know, okay, we do have a goaltender and we do have him locked down for a couple of years, and he is a guy who has shown already in limited stints that like he can hack it at this level,
Mhm.
and has succeeded at every level that he's played at.
Mhm.
And so, I think that it's good for him. I will be excited to watch him continue to grow as a goalie in the NHL, and also will be like a Kochetkov hipster. Like I knew him when, like I
Yeah.
knew him before he was cool.
Yeah. And I do think one thing that has worked in his favor as far as his development is just where he happened to land.
Hmm.
He landed in an organization that is really, really good at developing young talent.
Hmm.
And yeah, in the AHL, they did a good job with him there. And then you bring him up to the NHL as well, and that coaching staff there, they're really good at developing folks. And then you look at his learning tree, I guess, with
Hmm.
learning from Freddie and Auntie Ranta of guys that have been around.
Hmm.
And, Auntie Ranta has a ring.
Right.
So, these guys, they know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And both of those guys being pretty level headed, I guess you
Hmm.
would say, of, you know, like you said, Piotr learning when to pick his battles. Obviously, you don't want to be pushed around or anything
Right.
like that. Stand up for yourself. But, you don't have to have a goalie fight every game,
Right.
And I think he is in a really, really good place to succeed. Now,
Hmm.
we also did have at the start of the playoffs a whole bunch of guys from the AHL get called up, just kind of in reserve. I don't even know if any of them are really in the building for most games. But one guy we did actually see in the playoffs was Mackenzie McEachern. It was obviously very, very limited
Hmm.
in what we saw from him. But as far as the limited window we saw from him in the playoffs, what were your takeaways from him?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we saw from him in Carolina is what he did in Chicago when he was, healthy and in the lineup.
Mhm.
He is the go to the net front guy. He is the clean up the rebounds and the, human cannonball sort of player. He's someone who I was honestly surprised that he was in the AHL all season because he won a Stanley Cup with St. Louis a couple
Mhm.
years ago. He is a guy that I think just who knows why he took this opportunity. Was there another team that was, going to give him NHL time? Like, who knows? But when he was in the lineup in Chicago, because he was hurt for most of the season, came back at the tail end, um, you know, along with Kochetkov playing in Chicago, coming back down, seeing McEachern get back in the lineup, he pretty much immediately went on a scoring tear, and was contributing to that lineup, was helping, be both the veteran experience presence, the guy who's been there before, who knows what it takes to get to the next level. And I know that he was very respected in that room by the younger players, by the rest of the leadership group, the coaching staff, for what he brought in terms of like professionalism and just helping be a leader on that team. So I was really excited when I saw him get the opportunity in the playoffs because he can play at this level. Like, is he a top 6 guy? Like, no, that's not really where he's going to do his best work. But you can stick him there. You can clearly stick him there, and it worked.
Mhm.
For those couple of games. But yeah, I think that he's someone who, like I said, I was surprised he didn't get a look in the regular season. But I mean, there also weren't that many times it seemed
Mhm.
like where someone went down enough that they needed to even call someone up.
Yeah, it wasn't something that really happen a lot this year, which is weird, compared to last year. But one guy I was surprised wasn't a part of that group that got called up for the playoffs was Ryan Dzingel. He
Mhm.
played with the Hurricanes before, and I
Mhm.
know he was another guy that missed a lot of time this year due to his back injury.
Mhm.
But you I know this is kind of a very broad question, but why do you think he wasn't part of that group that was called up at the start of the playoffs?
My guess is between just rehabbing whatever injury,
Mhm.
he also became a new dad,
That's
about
right.
a month or so ago. And so, this is pure speculation. I, haven't talked to him. I don't know, what really went into that decision, but I could see him saying, like, I know I'm not going to get to play in the playoffs. Like, you're not paying me more to be here. I would like to be home with my baby.
Yeah.
That would be my guess. He had a hard season with, dealing with injuries. He really didn't get to play that much. I think he would probably say he didn't get to have the impact that he wanted to have this season, when he was in the lineup. Seemed by all accounts like great in terms of, a personality wise with
Mhm.
the team, but just couldn't stay healthy to stay in the lineup. So, my pure speculation guess is that he just was like, I would like to see my child, my
Yeah,
new,
that and
new small
rest.
human.
Yeah, 100% understandable. And again, like all his injuries, of not knowing, like, all right, am I going to need to suit up? Because I do feel
Mhm.
that if he was part of that group that was called up,
Yeah.
he probably would have been the first guy to get
Yeah.
put in the lineup because of his NHL experience,
Yeah.
because he knows a lot of these guys on the
Mhm.
roster already and has that rapport built up with them already. So I
Yeah.
do feel had he been a part of that, if he was healthy and
Mhm.
like able to
Yeah.
go, I know it's one thing like be on the roster,
Mhm.
being able to be called
Yeah.
up and being able to put in like, but like, is he physically ready to
Right.
go?
Yeah.
So that's another thing. Like, you may just need like time to just do what we're
Mhm.
doing right now, just be
Mhm.
at home and,
Yeah.
like you said, be with his baby. And there's again, other guys that called up with that group, but we didn't get to
Mhm.
see them. So we're gonna, kind of leave them be. And we'll talk about them more come, start of the training
Mhm.
camp and who we can potentially see there. But I know you are obviously on record of being a big Seth Jarvis fan,
I am.
and we will talk about his season as well as the Hurricane season as a whole right after this quick break. All right, folks. Again, Sarah, yeah, your son, Seth Jarvis, he had another really good year in the NHL. Obviously, he wasn't a Chicago Wolves player, but you do love you some
Mhm.
Seth Jarvis.
I
He is
do.
your adopted son. And I feel like he really took a step forward this playoff and also really elevated his game in the playoffs and really
Mhm.
did as much as he could.
Yeah.
And, what were your views on his season this year and his growth?
Yeah, I mean, I think that even just looking, I pulled it up just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. Even just looking at his points, um, you know, he had a down year in terms of like points per game versus last year,
Hmm.
but points aren't everything, right? And I
Yeah.
think that he showed a much more well-rounded game. I think that he is showing to Rod Brind'amour, who is a guy who like I feel like every player on that lineup, regardless of who you are or what spot you're in, like he wants to be able to trust you to throw you out there in a situation that is like dicey.
Hmm.
And I think that Seth Jarvis has continued to work on growing his game, becoming that like responsible 200-foot player that is going to like just make Rod Brind'amour love him every single minute of the day.
Hmm.
And so I think that yeah, he didn't score as many goals, he didn't put up as many points as he did, but I think that, a step back offensively has done good things for the rest of his game.
Yeah.
And, same story in the playoffs. Like, did he score a ton of points in the playoffs, particularly this last round? Well, no one scored a ton of points in the playoffs in this last round. Like,
Mhm.
that's part of the problem. But again, showcasing that more well-rounded game, showcasing that he is a guy who can play the whole season. I think he played all 82 games,
Mhm.
which is great for him. um I think that he is someone who is, I think we're only starting to scratch the surface of what he can do. And you kind of get, you get visions in your head of like pairing him with other similarly like offensive minded players. And, what is the best lineup combination you can make for him? Like, how do you put him in a position to succeed? And I think that he's showing that he is going to be, a fun contributor on this team for quite some time to come. And having that more fleshed out, like mature game is really going to make him like a mainstay in this team.
Yeah, I 100% agree there. And like you said, points isn't everything. And while he did take a step back in that regard, I feel like his defensive game really elevated. I know a big part of that was, of course, Brent Burns
Mm-hmm.
and how close they became this season. And, obviously, you got still 3 years left on the Burns deal after this year. So, they still got time and he still has time to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Because, one thing I think, has sort of flown under the radar in terms of Burns helping Jarvis was the fact that Burns used to be a forward. He
Yeah.
knows how to play that position.
Yeah.
It's not that he's never has and whatnot. And I think that the way he's taken him under his wing
Mm-hmm.
and really helped him elevate his defensive game, his
Mm-hmm.
grit. Because he's a small guy.
Yeah.
He's what 5'10", 5'11". He's my size
Mm-hmm.
basically, and he's laying hits out there on guys much bigger than him.
Yeah.
And like Kochetkov, he's showing that he's not going to be pushed around.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really big for him. And that that sophomore slump, I guess
Mm-hmm.
you would say, it wasn't like I know it was in his second year, but Sveshnikov,
Yeah.
how he took that real downslide
Mm-hmm.
and where it felt like he was kind of in his own head. He wasn't producing offensively, all that. We know how that went.
Yeah.
And it felt like that wasn't the case with Seth
Mm-hmm.
Jarvis. Like, okay, I'm not racking up the points as much as I would, but I'm gonna lay this guy out over
Right.
here. And he really, elevated his game a lot this year. I'm really excited to see what he does
Yeah.
going forward. And I don't think it's going to be a case of, oh, his entry level deal is up. I
Mm-hmm.
know, obviously, next year will be a contract year for him. So obviously you can expect some
Mm-hmm.
elevated play from there if they don't sign an extension
Right.
beforehand. 'Cause
Right. Yeah.
that's another one. It wouldn't surprise me if they just do that of, once off season starts of they just go ahead and ink him on a extension because he's earned it
Yeah.
for sure. But he's a guy I'm very much looking forward to seeing grow with the Hurricanes. Very
Mm-hmm.
much like Kochetkov. He's a guy you can look like, all right, this dude's freaking young.
Yeah.
And we see a future with him. It's not a
Right.
guy of, okay, he's a trade piece or we're going to let
Mm-hmm.
him walk or anything like that. No, he's a guy you want to have here.
Yeah.
And he can be a cornerstone piece of your franchise for many, many years. And I'm really excited to see what he can do in year 3 because,
Mm-hmm.
man, he like Jack Drew, you don't want to put a ceiling on him,
Mm-hmm.
but man, he
Yeah.
such a promising future.
Yeah.
And that's the case with the Hurricanes as a whole. Yet,
Mm-hmm.
yes, the loss in the conference final was disappointing and deflating, but I think we all kind of had them penciled in the conference final anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we were all kind of thinking they were going to be playing Boston, which wasn't the case. Uh, Thank you, Florida, for that.
Right.
But I said that at the start of the season, at the start of the playoffs, that conference final was where this team needed to go
Mm-hmm.
because they were having that trouble of getting over that
Yeah.
second round hump. They were able to get back to the conference final, riddled with injuries, by
Mm-hmm.
the way. And you're without arguably your best player in
Yeah.
Andrei Svechnikov. You did not have him, and that was really felt in the conference final with his playmaking ability not being
Mm-hmm.
there. Max Pacioretty, he was supposed to be your guy
Mm-hmm.
that would give you that offense in the playoff, which they haven't had in years past. We saw it
Mm-hmm.
in conference final here. So that does feel like a bit of a what if, but from you from you and your perspective, how do you feel this or God, how do you view this Hurricane season? Do you view it as a success? Do you view it as a disappointment? How do you view this season?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's like anytime you get eliminated from the playoffs, even if your expectations were like on the floor, like it's still a disappointment, right? Like, I still cover the Kings. Did I expect them to beat the Oilers? No. Like they're just not there yet. Was
Mhm.
it still disappointing when they got eliminated? Yeah, because you see when you see the team at their best, you see the flashes of like, oh, they could do this. They could beat this team. And then like they blow it. But I think that from the Hurricanes perspective, like the regular season was fantastic. They came up against like Sergei Bobrovsky, who is like inhabited by an alien or something. Like, I don't know where this version of Bobrovsky came from versus the version we've seen like the past couple of years. Like, they just got like goalied. Like,
Mhm.
I feel like this playoff series really shows how random this sport is and how
Yeah.
sometimes any analytic you look at, like Bobrovsky has more like goals saved against like above average than like any goalie ever in like since they
Mhm.
started recording the stat. Like I don't know what you do with that. Um, I think that you can kind of take solace in like they beat the Bruins, who had this like ridiculous historic year. They beat the Leafs, whatever about the Leafs, but like
Mhm.
the Leafs just blew up everything because they lost to Toronto. Like, I don't think Carolina is going to do that. I think they're a little more, mature than that.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that as soon as Svechnikov got hurt, I feel like the expectations went from like cup year, we're going to win the cup, to like, playing with house money now.
Yeah.
Because everyone knows that he is a big factor on the offense on that team. And so, yeah, it's disappointing that they got knocked out of the playoffs. The sweep is especially disappointing. But I don't know, like, also, you lose a game in like 4 overtimes,
Mhm.
and I feel like that just is like, I don't that's so hard to come back. Like, I had shades of that same ridiculous Tampa Columbus game
Yeah, what'd that go,
where
7?
yeah, like 5, 6, it was a lot. Um, and Tampa lost it, and you just sort of felt from there that, like, I don't know how you come back from that.
Yeah, honestly, that was a very deflating loss, and, yes, I know the record books will show this was a sweep, I know
Mhm.
that, but, looking at it, right now, like, these games were all really close.
Yeah,
The Hurricanes did not have puck luck on their side
right.
at all this series.
Yeah.
They kept hitting post after post after post
Mhm.
after post. I'd love to know a count on how many posts they hit
Right.
this series. Like, the puck luck was not there, and it does feel like if they got this bounce or that bounce,
Yeah,
then maybe this series is still going on.
yeah.
Maybe, they're the ones who got the sweep. You
Mhm.
never know. And I do think Brind'amour's comments are getting blown a little bit out of proportion.
Yeah,
They're getting taken out of context. But again, these were very close
yeah.
games. Like, yes, it was a sweep that was 4 straight losses for the
Mhm.
Hurricanes, but they were very, very close losses.
Yeah.
And they got this one bounce here, this one bounce
Mhm.
there, and they gotten some calls, especially down in Florida, then maybe we're still talking about the playoffs, still talking about
Yeah,
Drury, Nazen, McEachern,
yeah.
Chatfield, Kochetkov, still talking about how they're
Mhm.
playing in the playoffs rather than how they did play on the
Yeah.
playoffs. But these are all going to be guys, that I do feel we'll be talking about them more
Right.
next year, whenever training camp rolls around. Whether or not they will be on the Hurricanes roster, obviously, I think Jalen Chatfield will be. Good chance
Mhm.
Steph Nazen will be, but that's just something time will have to
Yeah.
tell, and we're gonna have to wait a while for that. We still gotta, crown a Stanley Cup champion. We still gotta get through free agency, the draft, all that stuff. Still a whole bunch of fun stuff to talk about when it comes to Hurricanes prospects, and we will, of course, always do that with Sarah Avampado because she is the bee's knees. She is the best. And Sarah, where can the folks find you on social media?
Sure. So you can find me on Twitter at Right Said Sarah. It's WRITE said Sarah with an H. Um, I am there just talking. You can find my Chicago Wolves coverage over at Canes Country. Um, who knows what's happening next season? I have no idea. No one knows what's happening next season in terms of what the Wolves are doing, their whole plan of being an independent team. Who knows? But for now, that's where you can find me. I'm also one half of the Calder Farmstead podcast, which is a podcast that looks exclusively at the AHL. So obviously there's no Wolves talk there either because they blew it in the regular season and didn't make the playoffs. But old friend of the team, Andrew Podorowski, will be competing for his third consecutive Calder Cup.
There you go.
So, that's fun.
Yes, and it's always fun talking to you, Sarah, as well. And you, of course, can find me on Twitter at JaredEllis_96. You can find the show on Twitter at LO_Hurricanes, on YouTube at Locked On Hurricanes Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on the SiriusXM app, the SXM app. We are also over there now, which is really, really cool. So, we obviously have fun talking to Sarah every time she's on the show. So, make sure you go follow her everywhere, keep up with her content, and as always, let's go Canes. Oh.